The way we lead impacts the way people live. This world needs truly human leadership. I'm Brent Stewart, your host. Thanks for listening. This podcast is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. You can connect with us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, and find our podcast articles and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. You're listening to a Truly Human Leadership podcast refresher, where we reshare insight from podcast episodes from the past. When you hear the terms influence or influencer, it can sometimes have a negative connotation. The first thing that might come to mind is someone trying to get you to buy something you don't want or need, or do something you don't want or need to do. But influence itself can be both good or bad, depending on the intention of the influencer. Think about the people in your life who've had a positive or negative influence. When it comes to leadership, a good leader is someone who exerts a positive influence. Our friend Bob Burg has recently written and released a book about this idea. Bob's been a guest on the podcast before. He and his co-author John David Mann have written a series of books that are parables about the characteristics of good leadership: the go-giver leader, and now the go-giver influencer. You can find out all about Bob and his books at Burg.com. Recently, Mary Rudder, Barry-Wehmiller's Director of Communications, and I sat down with Bob to talk about the relationship between influence and leadership.
The idea of influence has been a theme throughout all the books in the series. In the original The Go-Giver parable, there was law number 3, the law of influence. And in the Go-Giver leader, it was a little story about the power of leadership and influence. Well, we decided to kind of drill deep in terms of influence in this book for a couple of reasons. One is because, it is important to understand how to have influence, what influence really is, what it means. And we also feel that the way discourse has kind of really gone downhill lately in our country, but many countries, and people say the same thing. We wanted to bring forth a way through a business parable, because that is the theme we write, how to communicate in a way that we can lose the vitriol and the insults and the real horrible type of defamation toward people, and get people communicating again, get people understanding one another, and knowing that you can speak to people with kindness and tact and empathy while still maintaining your ideas and your values and so forth.
Let's kind of take a step back for a second. What do you mean by when you say influence?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because it's always so, especially in today's day, where the word influence has now sort of taken on a life of its own, and so it's being defined in many different ways. On a very, very basic level, influence can be defined as simply the ability to move a person or persons to a desired action, usually within the context of a specific goal. That's the definition of influence. And while it is a legitimate definition, I don't believe that that's in any way the substance or the essence of influence. The essence of influence is pull as opposed to push. As in the age-old question, how far can you push a rope? And we know the answer is not very far, at least not very fast or very effectively. And this is why great influencers don't push. You just never hear people say things like, wow, that Susan or that Tom, he is so influential. He has a lot of push with people, right? He's just so pushy, we'll follow him anywhere. No, he has or she has a lot of pull. That's what influence is. It's an attraction. Great influencers attract people to themselves first and then to their ideas.
And so influence really isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, just kind of what you're describing there, there's kind of a good influence and bad influence.
Well, there is, because influence itself is simply a principle. It's neither good nor bad. It's sort of like the physical law of gravity. In our earthly existence, gravity is a thing. It's neither good nor bad. It just is. Now, it manifests itself as good when it keeps us from floating aimlessly up into space. It manifests itself as bad when we walk off a 7-story building. Okay? In that same way, influence is simply a principle. That ability to move others to action. It can manifest itself as good when it's done with persuasion. It can manifest itself as bad when done with manipulation. Both the manipulator and the persuader, they both understand human nature. They understand human action. They understand what motivates and drives others to action. But the difference is with intent. I think this was explained just so well in a book published in 1987 by Dr. Paul W. written by Dr. Paul W. Sweats, called The Art of Talking So That People Will Listen, though it was much more about listening than it was about talking. And what he wrote was, manipulation aims at control, not cooperation. It does not consider the good of the other party. It results in a win-lose situation. In direct contrast to the manipulator, the persuader always seeks to enhance the self-esteem and the position of the other person. So it really comes down to, I think, in intent. I mean, a manipulator may not want to hurt you, but if that's what it takes for them to get their way, they will. They're very I or me focused. This could never happen with a persuader, because in order for a persuader to feel good about the situation, they've got to know that you came away better off than you were and that you feel good about it as well. And, I would take it so far as to say that a manipulator can have employees, but not a loyal team. They can make the sale, but not have a happy customer. And they can even have a family who they love and who loves them, but rarely will it be a happy, functional family. So persuasion is really the way we want to go.
So what would be some characteristics of influence in a good leader?
I think Dale Carnegie really summed it up very well when he's in his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And this is what I believe was the underlying premise of his book. And that's where he wrote, ultimately, people do things for their reasons, not our reasons. So a great leader who has a lot of influence and sustainable influence, they ask themselves questions such as, how does what I'm asking this person to do, or these people, how does what I'm asking this person to do, how does it align with their goals, with their wants, with their needs, with their desires? How does what I want this other person to do, how does it align with their values? And when we ask ourselves these questions thoughtfully, intelligently, genuinely, authentically, not as a way to manipulate another person, another human being into doing our will, but as a way of building everyone in the process, now we've come a lot closer to earning that person's commitment, as opposed to trying to depend on some type of compliance, which we know at best is simply not sustainable, and at worst will have people actually sabotaging the process completely, consciously or unconsciously.
Rallying the troops around the shared purpose is so critical to long-term success for personal success and the business success. And so how does influence play into that?
Yeah, and it's funny when you talk about purpose. I think of my friend Lisa Earle McLeod, who wrote a book called Leading with Noble Purpose. And what she found, and she went deep into discoveries and surveys and research, and she found that those companies who, just like you said, had a purpose more than just financial. When their purpose was financial, they tended to be less profitable. right? When their purpose was something greater, when their purpose was they really felt they were making a significant difference, to the world or to this marketplace or to what have you. That's when their profit was much better. And I think of course, one of my heroes, Bob Chapman, right? And I think this is when you have a purpose that you're seeing your employees as somebody's treasured son or daughter. I think that is leadership, and I think that is what rallies people around, and I think that is what really enhances loyalty and a better bottom line.
Listening to your definition of an influencer who is a good leader, listening has to play a big part in that in terms of determining what other people are looking for, what other people want. Could you talk about that a little bit, the importance of listening and being an influencer for good?
Yeah, I think this is really one of the most important aspects. In fact, in Tom Peters' latest book, The Excellence Dividend, he went on and on about listening and its importance and how to do it well, and made some just wonderful, wonderful points. Principle number 2 in the book is to step into the other person's shoes. And this, to me sounds trite when you first say it, because we've heard that saying so much, right? Step into the other person's shoes. But then you think about it. It's not that easy to do, because most of us have different size feet. And we can't necessarily step into their shoes literally. Now, figuratively, we mean, hey, we see the world in different ways. We come from different belief systems, different ways of different points of view, different ways of seeing the world. Most conflict, most misunderstandings are really a matter of 2 or more people seeing the same thing from 2 different viewpoints. So how do we actually step into that other person's shoes? Well, we ask questions so we can discover what we need to, and then we listen. But here's the thing. We don't just listen with our ears. In fact, one of the mentors in the story, because there were 2 mentors and 2 proteges in the story, one of the mentors told their protege, don't just listen with your ears. That's the surface kind of listening most of us do. It's what we do we listen just enough so that we can speak and say what we want to say. Right? Sometimes we don't really even hear the person. So it's not just listening with our ears. It's listening with our eyes. It's listening with our posture. It's listening, as he said, with the back of our neck. In other words, with our entire being. We are listening in a way that's non-judgmental. We're listening in a way in which the cup is empty. We're listening in a way that we are simply trying to gain knowledge and understanding. And when we do this, 2 wonderful things happen. One is that we actually know more than we did before, right? But the second thing is the other person feels listened to. They feel heard. They feel understood, which is a very, very basic human need, and they tend to trust that person more.
Let's talk about who you think the audiences are and why it's relevant to them.
Yeah, I just think communication has practically broken down at this point, at least positive communication. I mean, really, you look at it, whether between family members, friends, coworkers, politicians, political pundits, and of course, hey, the tens of millions of people on social media, right? Today's discussions are really no longer discussions. They tend to be fueled up, hate-filled, vitriol-spewing diatribes and personal insults. However, no minds are being changed, right? They're remaining more and more stuck, and I guess the word now is the echo chambers of their already closely held beliefs. So we see friends becoming enemies, discourse shutting down, understanding and acceptance not being reached, and people don't feel good about it. And I think people would like to see this change, but as yet, it's really not happening. And we'd like to, with this book, we would like to do our part to kind of get that started. Regardless of the medium, I think we can try to understand others better than we're doing right now. In other words, it's sort of gotten to a point where if you don't agree with me, not only are you wrong, but you are a bad person, right? You must have bad intent. And, really, most people have pretty good intent. And now there's always the fringes on either side and what have you, but most people pretty much would like good things to happen to themselves and to others and see a nice world and a healthy country and abundant and so forth. Now, they do think they each have their own way maybe of wanting to go about it. But when we look at someone who doesn't agree with us and we assume that their intent is bad, well, obviously we're not going to listen to them. Why would we listen to someone who we believe is evil? So I think when we can start, whether it's in person, whether it's at a family gathering or somewhere at a restaurant, or whether it's online, I think when we hear or read a statement from someone that rather than just because it doesn't agree with our already closely held beliefs, rather than seeing them as having bad intent, let's pause for a second. Let's control our emotions for a moment and instead assume they have good intent and then ask a question, not ask in a way that makes them feel defensive. This is where tact and empathy comes in, but asking in a way that they feel open, that they let down their defenses, that they're okay with engaging. And when we do this, we can understand that this doesn't mean we're going to agree with the person. It only means we're going to try to understand where they're coming from.
We in talking about listening, the book has 5 essential elements. I would say, I guess they were 5 essential elements of a good influencer. That's one of them. Talk about the other 4.
Well, yeah, it begins with what we call mastering your emotions. That's where it starts, right? Because it's only when we're in control of our own emotions that we're even in a position to take a potentially negative situation or person and turn it into a win for everyone involved. We all know that as leaders. We know it's incumbent upon us to not lose our head and let the things that people say or do push our emotional hot buttons. Yet, how often do we do that, right? And we say or do something that's not productive. In fact, it's downright counterproductive. And the reason is we're human beings, and as human beings, we are emotional beings or creatures. And while we'd like to think we're logical, the fact is it's been proven, we're pretty emotionally driven. We make major decisions based on emotion. We back up those emotional decisions with logic. We rationalize, which means we tell ourselves rational lies. And it kind of sometimes spins out of control and good decisions aren't made. Well, we're not saying you should deny your emotions in any way. I mean, not only would that not be logical, but we don't need to. Emotions are a great part of life. They bring us joy. They make life worthwhile. We're just saying that you need to master your emotions as opposed to your emotions mastering you, or as a great leadership mentor of mine, Dondi Scumaci, puts it, take your emotions along for the ride, but make sure you are driving the car. You're behind the wheel. Your emotions are in the passenger seat. It's sort of like in one of the mentors in the story suggests to Ben, her protege, that, imagine you're a company and you're a CEO. Well, you have a board of directors. That board of directors is your emotions. The CEO is your logic. Now, a CEO is going to certainly consider the opinions of their board of directors. The board of directors have a lot of wisdom to offer, just as our emotions have a lot of wisdom to offer. But when it comes down to it, it's the CEO who makes the decision. It's the logical part of our mind that needs to make the decision if we want to create the context where our decisions are going to have the best chances of the best results. The third one is to set the proper frame. And a frame is simply the foundation from which everything else evolves. Probably my favorite frame story is when I was in a Dunkin' Donuts restaurant, and there was a little boy, a toddler, about 2.5 years old, and he was running around the restaurant, and his parents called him over to their table. He began to walk over, and as he did, he took a spill on the floor. He fell. Now, he didn't hurt himself, you could tell, but he was surprised. He was shocked, and he immediately looked over at his mom and dad to get their interpretation of the event, right? What happened happened. He wanted to know, okay, what happens next? Now, I truly believe that had his mom and dad gotten panicky and upset and, oh no, are you okay? He'd have started to cry. But they handled it just beautifully. They walked over quickly, but very calmly. They smiled. They applauded. They laughed. They said, "Oh, what a good trick! That looks like so much fun!" And immediately he began to laugh. What the parents did is they set a productive frame from which he could operate. We can do this whenever we meet someone new, whenever we begin a meeting, whenever we have any situation where we come across another person. It might be as simple as a genuine, from the heart smile to let this person know how excited we are to meet them and do business with them. But we also have to be able to reset another person's already set frame. Let's take, if we can, a sales situation, and you have a buyer who is kind of defensive for whatever reason. Maybe they've had a bad experience with a salesperson. Maybe they're just in a bad mood or something happened with their family that day, what have you. And they kind of, put off the vibes that they're really not happy about this. They're not paid there. They may even say something like, I'm just getting information right now, and, or what have you. Now, if we, the salesperson, if we buy into that frame, now it creates sort of a push type of thing, and we buy into their defensiveness, and it's not a productive conversation. So instead, let's reset the frame, and let's say the buyer's name is Susan, the prospect's name is Susan, and you might say, Susan, while we've been able to help a lot of people with this product, whether or not it's the right answer for you, we simply can't know without exploring deeper and determining whether it meets your needs. So please know this conversation is for both of us to discover this. And if it does, great. If not, that's okay too. So what we've done right here is we've reframed this from an adversarial type of situation to one in which there are now two allies, both looking out for her best interest.
And so then the fourth one is communicating with tact and empathy.
Yeah, this is really so key. It's what brings it home. It's what brings it together, because you can do everything right, but you've really got to be able to communicate in a way that's tactful. Well, my dad has always defined tact as the language of strength. And I've always enjoyed that definition, because to me, for someone to be consistently tactful, that takes strength. Because we've got to be able to control our own emotions, as opposed to just clicking back on email to a nasty email with something just as nasty, or on social media, or in person when someone says something, or a prospect provides or a negotiating counterpart provides something that annoys us, to instead of just reacting, to instead respond and pause and get ourselves together. That takes strength. To make sure that you're asking the questions to be able to understand where they are, that takes strength. To be able to make sure that you've set a frame that's productive, that takes strength. So tact is really being able to, whether it's correct or critique or, dare I say, constructively criticize, not that we ever want to do any of those, but we're talking about the real world. But it's to communicate a message to someone that normally would not be well received, and to do so in such a way that not only is the person not defensive toward you or your idea, but they're open to you and they're more accepting of your idea. And that's what tact allows us to do.
So the fifth one, Bob, might be the most difficult one, and I think it's maybe one of the things that's difficult in the discourse of today, why the discourse is so charged. Letting go of having to be right. Talk to us about that for a second.
Yeah, and this one sounds counterintuitive. Let go of having to be right, as if, are you saying you don't care about being right? No, of course not. We want to be right. We prepare to be right. We do everything we can to be right, of course. It really just means you're letting go of your attachment to having to be right. Now, this at first sounds like it would make you less influential. Actually, just the opposite. It makes you more influential with others. Why? Really for two reasons. One, when you can let go of having to be right, you're able to go into learner's mode. You're able to open your mind and take in new information, as opposed to the person who is so stuck, and this may be the boss who can't admit to being wrong or can't even consider that he or she might be wrong, or it might be this person with whom you're in a political discussion. This is the person you kind of look at, you say to yourself, wow, don't confuse me with the facts. My mind is already made up, right? And so that person can't learn. That person falls victim to what's called confirmation bias. It's a term that's used a lot lately, and it means exactly what it says. It means that when a person takes in or comes across some new information, if it happens to confirm their already held beliefs or biases, they'll accept it. If not, they'll ignore it. And it's typically unconscious. The challenge with that is you can't learn that way. You can't get any further along the knowledge scale than you already are. So when you're open to not having to be right, two things will occur that make you far more influential. One, you actually get to learn more. Now, again, just because you're open to the idea that you may be wrong, you may not have all the facts, that doesn't mean you're going to just capitulate and agree with the person. No, it just means you're open to the idea. It means you're allowing yourself to grow. This gives you more knowledge than it does the person who refuses to do so. Secondly, when the party with whom you're negotiating or conversing or what have you, when they see they're dealing with someone whose interest is in discovering the truth as opposed to just being right at all costs or winning by making them lose or what have you, they're much more amenable to you and your ideas.
To kind of close things up here, Bob, what would be your hope with this book in terms of teaching people what an influencer really is?
The hope would be that people realize if you really want to influence another human being, you've got to move from an I or me focus to an other focus. You've got to find out what drives them, what motivates them, again, their needs, their wants, their desires, what problems you're solving for them or what you're helping them to achieve, and approach it that way. And when you do, you're going to find you get so much more of what you want. Both parties really end up coming far, far out ahead.
Don't forget to find us and connect on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller. And you can find more podcasts, articles, and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks for listening.